The Battle of Bunker Hill, fought on June 17, 1775, was a pivotal early clash between British forces and American colonial militias during the American Revolutionary War. Despite being a tactical victory for the British, the battle was a watershed moment in the fight for American independence, boosting colonial confidence and galvanizing support for the revolutionary cause. While it is commonly referred to as the Battle of Bunker Hill, much of the fighting occurred on nearby Breed's Hill in Charlestown, Massachusetts. The conflict was part of the larger Siege of Boston, which began in April 1775 with the battles of Lexington and Concord. In the weeks following the skirmishes, the colonial militias surrounding Boston sought to contain the British Army, which had retreated to the city for safety. General Thomas Gage, the British commander-in-chief in North America, was effectively trapped inside Boston with approximately 5,000 troops. In response to the growing number of American militiamen encircling the city, Gage requested reinforcements and was eventually supported by Generals William Howe, Henry Clinton, and John Burgoyne, all of whom would play important roles in the war. As the siege intensified, the colonial forces, led by the Massachusetts Committee of Safety and the newly formed Continental Congress, debated how to strengthen their position. One proposed strategy was to occupy the high ground around Boston. This included Bunker Hill and Breed's Hill, which provided commanding views of the city and Boston Harbor. Controlling these hills would allow the colonial militia to threaten British operations and potentially disrupt the arrival of reinforcements and supplies. On the evening of June 16, 1775, Colonel William Prescott ordered approximately 1,200 colonial troops to fortify Bunker Hill. However, rather than occupying Bunker Hill, the colonial forces chose to construct their primary fortifications on Breed's Hill, which was closer to Boston and considered more tactically advantageous. Prescott and his men built a large redoubt, a defensive earthwork, on the summit of Breed's Hill while it was dark. By dawn on June 17th, British forces in Boston had noticed the newly constructed defenses and realized that the American militia had taken a daring and dangerous stance. The British High Command, particularly General Howe, determined that the colonial position could not continue. To drive the rebels off Breed's Hill, Howe decided to launch a direct frontal assault. Though other British officers, including General Clinton, advised caution and suggested flanking maneuvers, Howe believed that a concentrated attack backed by naval bombardment would quickly crush colonial resistance. This underestimation of the colonial militia would be costly. On the morning of June 17th, the British launched a preliminary naval bombardment of American positions. Meanwhile, approximately 2,000 British troops began assembling at the base of the Charlestown Peninsula, preparing for the uphill assault. The British soldiers, dressed in bright red coats and laden with heavy equipment, faced the daunting task of marching in formation across open ground, under fire, to well-fortified positions. The colonial forces on Breed's Hill were composed of men from several New England colonies, including Massachusetts, Connecticut, and New Hampshire. Despite lacking formal military training, many of these militiamen were skilled hunters and frontiersmen. They were commanded by Colonel Prescott, who reportedly gave his men the famous instruction, "Don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes," which reflected the need to conserve limited ammunition and maximize the impact of each shot. The first British assault started around mid-afternoon. As Howe's troops advanced up the hill, they met stiff resistance. The colonists held their fire until the British approached close range, then unleashed a devastating volley that resulted in significant British casualties. The disciplined ranks of British soldiers faltered and had to retreat down the slope. The British regrouped and launched a second assault, but met the same fate. Once again, colonial musket fire caused heavy casualties, and the British line buckled under the pressure. Undeterred, General Howe ordered a third assault, this time focusing on the left flank of the American position while attacking the redoubt directly. By this point, the colonial defenders were running dangerously low on ammunition and could no longer maintain the high rate of fire that had thwarted previous attacks. In the final charge, British troops broke through the redoubt, engaging the defenders in brutal hand-to-hand combat. Due to a lack of bayonets and sufficient powder, the colonial forces were forced to retreat across Charlestown Neck to the mainland. Despite the ultimate British victory, the cost was enormous. The British suffered over 1,000 casualties, including more than 200 deaths, many of whom were officers. General Howe, who had personally led the charge, was said to be horrified by the bloodshed. The colonial losses were much lower, estimated at 400 to 500 killed, wounded, or captured, but they included Dr. Joseph Warren, a prominent Patriot leader and president of the Massachusetts Provincial Congress. His death was a devastating blow to the revolutionary cause, but it also enraged and motivated the colonial population. Both sides' leadership played critical roles in determining the outcome of the battle. On the British side, General William Howe's decision to launch a direct frontal assault despite warnings and alternative strategies exemplified the arrogance and overconfidence that many British officers felt toward colonial militias. While the assault eventually succeeded in taking the hill, it came at a high cost and failed to break the spirit of the American resistance. General Thomas Gage, who authorized the attack, received harsh criticism for his handling of the battle. In the aftermath, he was summoned to Britain and replaced by General Howe as Commander-in-Chief of British forces in North America. The loss of life and the unexpected resistance encountered on Breed's Hill forced the British to reconsider their strategy, further entrenching them in a war that would prove far more protracted and difficult than they had predicted. On the American side, Colonel William Prescott was hailed as a hero for his leadership under fire. His calm demeanor and effective use of limited resources allowed the colonial militia to repel two major assaults by experienced British regulars. Another crucial American commander, Israel Putnam, assisted in the construction of defenses and encouraged troops to stand firm. Dr. Joseph Warren, despite having no military experience, fought valiantly and died in the redoubt, becoming a martyr for the Patriot cause. Other colonial leaders, including General Artemus Ward and General John Stark, offered reinforcements and tactical assistance. Stark's New Hampshire regiment played a critical role in defending the northern flank and repelling British attempts to outmaneuver the Americans. Their effective use of a rail fence reinforced with hay provided critical cover and allowed them to fire muskets continuously against British flanking units. The Battle of Bunker Hill had significant psychological and political ramifications. For the British, it was a sobering reminder that the American rebellion would not be easily suppressed. The high casualty rate forced the British to take more cautious and calculated approaches in subsequent engagements. It also resulted in the replacement of General Gage, indicating a shift in British command strategy. For the American colonies, the battle served as both a rallying cry and a source of confidence. Though technically defeated, the colonial militia demonstrated that they could stand up to the might of the British Army. It boosted public support for the war and increased enlistment in the Continental Army, which was formally established by the Continental Congress soon after. George Washington, who was appointed Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army just days after the battle, learned valuable lessons from the conflict as he began to organize and train a more unified military force. The conflict also had significant international ramifications. News of the conflict spread quickly throughout Europe, with rival powers such as France and Spain closely following it. The heavy British losses signaled vulnerability, and while formal alliances with the American colonies would not emerge for several years, the Battle of Bunker Hill sowed the seeds of international interest in the conflict. Ultimately, this international dimension would determine the outcome of the Revolutionary War. In terms of military tactics, the battle demonstrated the limitations of traditional European-style linear warfare in the rugged terrain and unconventional conditions of North America. The British reliance on frontal assaults and rigid formations proved costly against entrenched defenders who used guerrilla tactics and exploited their knowledge of the terrain. The American militia, for its part, proved that with exemplary leadership, strong defensive positions, and high morale, it could effectively challenge one of the world's most powerful professional armies. The battleground itself became symbolic in the years following the war. In 1825, on the 50th anniversary of the battle, Revolutionary War veterans, including the Marquis de Lafayette, laid the cornerstone of the Bunker Hill Monument in a grand ceremony. The monument, a 221-foot granite obelisk completed in 1843, stands on Breed's Hill to honor the bravery and sacrifice of those who fought there. In retrospect, the Battle of Bunker Hill foreshadowed the long and bloody struggle to come. It revealed the depth of colonial commitment to independence, as well as the willingness of ordinary citizens to fight for their liberties. While the battle did not result in a strategic shift in control of Boston, it did significantly alter both sides' perceptions of the conflict. The colonists had demonstrated their ability to inflict significant damage on British forces. At the same time, the British recognized that they were not dealing with an unruly mob, but with a determined population fighting for self-rule.